All right, let's go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Rhythm and Roads podcast. I am Josiah Solis. I'm here with my brother, Joshua Jacob, who's the primary host, and we are joined today with a very successful and special guest, Sean McNamara, filmmaker and TV executive of films and shows that you probably grew up with. So let's get right to it. Sean, introduce yourself again, but just tell us a little bit more who you are, because you are the star of this episode.
All right, I'm Sean McNamara. I'm a filmmaker. I have done, some of the films that may be more recognizable is Soul Surfer. There was Miracle Season, Three Ninjas, if you were from the 90s, Three
Oh yeah.
Ninjas Hiding in Mega Mountain. Um, what else? And then a lot of TV series for Disney, like Even Stevens, That's So Raven, Phil of the Future, Sweet Life on Deck. These are just some of the things that I may have done. I've got two films coming out this year. I had Reagan come out last year,
Okay.
and this year, Bow Artist at War comes out on September 26th from Paramount
Oh
nationwide,
wow. Nice.
worldwide. And then we have Soul on Fire. It comes out October 10th nationwide from Sony Affirm Films. So
Wow.
that's kind of what I do, and that's
Yeah.
it.
And
Wow.
you
Amazing.
have quite the extensive career.
Yeah.
I think you went back to the 80s, correct? You've been involved in this industry since the 80s, correct?
I have been. I graduated from Loyola Marymount Film School in 1984,
Okay.
and my first, actually in 1980 though, 81 was my first official um, show. I had no connections into this business other than I was the paper boy for Disney Studios, and my buddy Marty Passetta's dad directed the Academy Awards every day, and I was always like, "Get me a meeting with your dad." And he was like, "Oh yeah, yeah," and he never did it. And then we graduated high school, but he went to the same college as me, and I'm like, "Please get me a meeting with your dad." So
Wow.
somehow between him, his brother, and his sister, they got me an interview with their dad. And I go into Marty Pasetta Sr.'s office. He's smoking a cigar, talking on the phone to Bob Hope, and he goes, finally hangs up and he goes, looks at me and he goes, "So, kid, what do you do?" And that was a question I was not prepared for at all.
Wow.
And I'm like, "Well, I'm in a rock and roll band. I plug in microphones." And he goes, "Audio, that's for you." And the next thing I know, a black limo drives into my driveway, and I get on an airplane and I fly to Washington, D.C.,
Wow.
and I plug in microphones for Ronald Reagan's inauguration.
Wow.
Wow. What a trip.
That was my official start in doing the business. And then 40 years later, I do the Reagan movie, which was just wild.
Yeah,
Wow.
congratulations on that.
Yeah,
The
congrats.
film. The as a millennial, I'm sure Josh can say the same thing. The first time that I saw Dennis Quaid was as Nick Parker in Lindsay Lohan's
Yeah.
um, Parent Trap.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
of course, and he hasn't really aged a bit since that film.
Yeah, he has
I
it.
have no idea
Yeah.
how he does it. He is ageless, and he's just the nicest guy and easy to work with. And he learned to surf when we made Soul Surfer
Oh
and
wow.
a film called On a Wing and a Prayer. And the problem
Okay.
with that one is he is a pilot, so I had to teach him
Oh,
to
okay.
unlearn. Like we'd be doing scenes, and he'd be saying the right things. I was going, "Dennis, you have to say the wrong things, like what's a rudder and what's
Yeah,
a
yeah.
flap."
Yeah.
Because he's going, "I'm putting flaps at 20%." I'm going, "No, no, no, you wouldn't know that."
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Oh,
And
what a trip.
so one of the things, Sean, is that I know you mentioned a little bit about how just the connections that you had with your buddy and his father, but I want to know
Mhm.
like what got you into film. I think everyone had that breaking moment
Yeah.
or that introductory moment. James Cameron had it with Star Wars. There are a lot of people you can go down the list of what kind of was like, oh, I want to do that. So what was that for you?
So the same old story. When I was 12 years old, our family, there were six kids, two parents, all took a trip to Ireland. And we were exploring Ireland and meeting our cousins and seeing our names on grave sites all over Ireland. And for some reason, when we got to the Shannon airport, my dad bought me a Super 8 camera. Like I
Oh
wasn't
wow.
really wanting one or thinking about it, but he bought it. I think maybe he wanted to buy it for himself, but it was like for me. So that day I started filming outside the window of the plane, and I love this thing. I had no idea how it worked or what worked about it, but I remember it looked cool, and there was an 85 millimeter or an 85 diffusion filter, was learning all this stuff, and made little movies with my friends. And at that time, I didn't know about cutting. Like I would make films like The Sniper, and I would shoot my friends walking down the street, and then he'd shoot me. I'm up on the my roof with a BB gun, and then I'd run down and shoot him looking up at me, and then he'd look point it back up at me, and I would shoot, and then I'd run back down. I mean, literally having to climb down a tree to get these angles, and I'd put we got ketchup. We'd fill up his mouth, and he'd go "Bleh," like that. And I learned how to do slow motion.
Oh,
And it was all in camera. I had no concept that people would cut it. And I was always going, what are these white flashes between every time we cut back and forth? But
right.
it was just this experience. And when I started playing those for my classes, people would clap. And I think that's the worst thing that can happen to a filmmaker. Somebody claps at your work, you put some music on behind it and it feels and looks like some sort of a film with people they know. So then during high school, I got into theater. I was like in the pit chorus in West Side Story, and I was in On the Town my sophomore year. But by junior and senior year, I started like starring in it. I played Burger and Hare and Jesus and Godspell. And I remember the actors that were around me were like, I feel so at home on the stage and I love the feeling. And I was going, I feel really awkward. I stand up here, I'm fully aware there's an audience. I know if I'm in my light, I know what the all these things are. So I started realizing what cinematography was, and I got accepted to USC as an actor, and I got accepted to Loyola Marymount in the cinematography school, where I could take cinema classes, and I opted to go to Loyola in order to just be behind the camera. So that's kind of where that started. And but during the course of college, because of that first job, I did do audio gigs all through college that helped me make it. I still played guitar. And when I graduated in 84, I did the last like big audio gig I did was the 1984 Olympics. I was the monitor mixer at the LA Coliseum. And so just doing a live show was just incredible. I remember the rehearsal before the big opening ceremonies. I have it all set so you could hear everything. And all of a sudden, like halfway through the ceremony, the rehearsal, I hear like, oh my gosh. And I'm like running through all what speakers blew up. They didn't tell us, but they had one of those guys fly in on a jetpack and fly into the middle of the football field. But they didn't put that in the script. They went like, cool event. But again, I wasn't looking up in the air to see somebody. So all of these magical things, John Williams there with a huge orchestra playing like so all of that sort of stuff happened, but it was during 1984 that I was doing audio and I wasn't feeling good about myself, like whatever, I was bummed. And somebody said, hey, there's this movie down at the Chinese, let's go check it out. So I said, all right. I walk in there and 2 hours later, I was happy, I was stoked, I was pumped. And I'm like, what just happened? And it was Raiders of the Lost Ark. And as I walked out of the theater, I went, I was bummed 2 hours ago, just feeling not good. And 2 hours later, I walked out totally jazzed and happy. And in my head, I just went, I want to do that to people. I want to make them, if they're having a bad day, go and have a great day. And that was, for me, that was the lesson that a film could actually do that. And by that time, I had been studying films in college and learning how to shoot them. But I didn't realize that I was doing it so I could affect an audience in a positive way. So that's my run and how I got to starting wanting to be a director. Now, in the meantime, I did things like I was a PA. I've done every job on a set. I love being a PA. They'd throw me the keys to their Mercedes and I'd drive down Hollywood Boulevard, get it washed. And then I would drop scripts off at people's houses. I didn't matter what I would pour coffee for people, but I'd remind them, I'm a director. I would just tell everybody who would listen. And that eventually paid off because eventually somebody said, we need a director to do these little commercials for the owner's brother who has a welding company in Connecticut. And I'm like, I'll do it. Can I use all these cameras that you have here? Can I use all these sets? And they were, yep. And they gave me $500. They thought I was going to do a slide, but instead I did 6 blown out commercials with all my actor friends and all of that. So I definitely just pushed it, as far as what I could do. But those were the starting in the business in high school and college.
Wow.
Yeah, and I certainly have heard that kind of advice before about letting people know the arena that you thrive in as a creative. When you were directing, what was the first film? I know you mentioned the commercials that you were doing, but what was like the first time you were handed the reins to direct either a feature or a short? Did you make shorts when you were at Loyola? Or
At
did
Loyola, I made shorts, and I still have those. And they gave you the equipment there.
yeah.
You check it out. And I remember I did a big short, and I closed down Hollywood Boulevard in front of the Pantages, which
Wow.
was odd for a student to do. But I failed so miserably at it. I mean, I shot it, I figured it out. But back in those days, they didn't have a monitor, so I had to
Sure.
trust what the DP was saying up on the top of the crane. Well, behind the dancers in the street was all the police blocking and all of the cars turning left and right and, honking, being pissed off that we closed down Hollywood Boulevard. And so again, just lesson after lesson. And it was at night, we had to light it and all of that stuff. But after those six Hartford Modern School of Welding um, uh, commercials that I did for the Arthur Anakiriko's brother, that was $500. Then he goes, I want to do some PSAs, and he gave me $5,000, and I did them for the Mothers Against Drunk Driving and for Special Friends of the Children. It was Henry Winkler's company, and the Salvation Army. He had been helped by the Salvation Army. He gave me $5,000 for that. And then I had my DP, who was fantastic, and he had a German friend coming to town from Germany and wanted to do his first feature. And we met at the Polo Lounge in Beverly Hills, and he goes, I want to do it for $500,000. And to me, that was an ungodly amount of money, but
Yeah.
I didn't believe him for a second. I remember I didn't even have a jacket. You had to have a jacket in those days to walk into that club, but they had backup jackets, and I threw it over my t-shirt and walked in, and I walked out with a check for $25,000. And I remember my hands were shaking because I was going, this can't be real. This can't be real. I opened an account, put it in, it was real. It cashed and everything. And so our first movie, or my first movie that I directed and produced, was called Hollywood Chaos. I was 27 years old. And it's amazing, even after being in film school and working your way up doing different jobs in the business, how little you know. And that was the film that I learned everything depends on story. And there was a film I had under my
100%.
arm that a friend of mine from college, Neil Jimenez, wrote called The Virgin. And he was a great writer. He wrote like River's Edge and just incredible movies. And but the German guy, Charles Cohen, didn't want to do that. He wanted his own Hollywood Chaos about a farm girl coming to LA to be in a play. Like I should have said, well, maybe she should go to New York to be in a play and LA to be in a movie, but I wasn't sophisticated enough. I would just kind of say, okay, somebody's giving me a $500,000 to make a movie. I'm going to do it. And so we wrote the script. Again, the biggest thing is script is everything. If it's on the page, we'll make a great movie. So
100%.
I should have taken the money and hired a writer who had written films that had been made and successful. But again, I got my friends to do it who wanted to be writers, but who weren't writers. I mean, they probably hadn't read any books on writing. I had a certain degree, you wrote scripts in class when you're in college, but never to when you don't try it and fail, you aren't very successful at it. You don't know how it works. But this is the first one we did it, and it looks spectacular. Christian Sebald, who just did Final Destination, Bloodlines that came out. Listen, I'm so proud of him. But we've been making films together for 40 years. And
Wow.
anyway, so he was just as talented back then, but we made it look gorgeous. We had some real actors and all of that stuff, but the script just wasn't there. It was a very, I remember our premiere I had up at Universal in one of their screening rooms, and I was so proud of it. And about 5 minutes, 10 minutes in, one person walked out of the theater. And it was just a weird, why would you walk out of my movie? Like, what's going on? And but it really like sent, shocks in there. And then when you finally get real audiences of what they really thought about it, they didn't think it was very good. So it was one of those like learning things where I had to go back to the table and go, everything depends on a great script, and make sure that you got to have great everything, great actors. But if you don't start with a great script, it's really hard to make a really good movie.
Interesting.
Yeah, and the what you were saying about like the script being just the bedrock of the production, and I think understanding the creative process, like it was, you know, who was it? Was it Hemingway that says the first draft of anything is shit? And I think for people when they write the first draft and they're just kind of like, what? This is who would want to watch this? It's like you got to get into the process of just refining it, and ultimately so that it gets to that great place, so that it can be made into something. And
Well,
what
I
was the
agree.
yeah.
It's funny. I'm doing a movie on Hemingway right now, and I know the quote, but I call it the vomit draft. When you're writing or whoever is just put anything, write badly, but get it on paper so that or if you type it into a computer, Final Draft or whatever, just put something down there, and you will write a lot of good stuff and not so good stuff. But the whole thing is writing is rewriting, as you can imagine. You have to keep culling it and going back what works. Something you thought was great that you wrote yesterday, you look at it the next day. I believe strongly in like knowing what your story is. I don't know which one of my teachers. I had so many. I read Truby and making a good script great and Save the Cat and Screenwriting 101. But I like to keep it in four sheets of paper, act one, first part of act two, second part of act two, and act three, and refine that outline as you're writing scenes and dropping them in. But I like to know what the log line is so you ultimately know what your movie's about. You're constantly outlining so you can move things much quicker. And then you're writing scenes when the magic hits your brain, you start, writing whatever you want to do. And that's if I write it myself. Many times I'm working with the writer. And so for me, structure is huge. I always want to know, are we in act one? Are we in the first part of act two or the second part of act two? What is the climax? What does the character learn or not learn by the end of the movie? So that I know where I am. Because then I know like that story, the traditional story is being dropped in properly.
Wow, interesting.
One of the things that I want to get your thoughts on was just how you segued into working in some beloved Disney Channel shows. I know you've done work with the N in Beyond the Break. Like
Yep.
again, I grew up in during that era seeing
Yeah.
those things on TV. Um, Wanted to know like what kind of got you into working with Disney Channel, especially in the early 2000s, which when that time was Even Stevens. That's So Raven. That's Raven kind of came out a little bit later than Even Stevens, if I remember correctly. It was probably 2000, what, three? When
For
Even
which
Stevens,
show?
That's So Raven.
Yeah, that was second. Well, it all started in 19. Well, first of all, 84, I graduated school. So from 84 to like 89, you're bouncing around, PAing, doing this, doing sound court. Like I was all over the place, always knowing I wanted to come back to make movies, but I had to make a living and work. But in 1989, my
Sure.
friend from high school, Paul Hohen, he was directing a show called uh, the Kids Incorporated for Disney Channel. Kids Incorporated,
Okay.
Kids. And it was season 10 and they needed a producer. So they came to me and said, would you produce it? Because by that time I had been producing things along the way. And Paul directed all 10 episodes. So that got me into the Disney world. And I had a roadmap because they had done it before. And a lot of famous people had been on that show who would become famous. But from that show, I went on and we did a show at Nickelodeon. And at that point, we were like, again, being hired as a producer. And I did a pilot called The Secret World of Alex Mack. And I don't know if you remember that. That was in like 92, 93. And again, the pilot was successful with Disney. So when it was time, they ordered like 10 or 11 episodes. I said, I want to direct three. And they were like, okay. And I said, I want the produced by credit. Like I was very specific with what I wanted because I'd already directed my first feature when I was 27, but I was in my 30s and I was like going, I got to have like a career here. And I did the first season of Alex Mack, and we made it for a very low price. Um, but one of the things I realized, we did it over a summer, and my now business partner, we've been in business almost 30 years, David Brookwell, we're at Brookwell McNamara Entertainment. We did all the work. We made it happen. And the executive producer got all the money. And I was like, and I was like, good for you, but we should put a shingle up that says this is our company. And just wanting to do that, we just kind of did it. We said, now we have our own company. And in the middle there, I did my second film. Then there was like Three Ninjas was actually my third film. But we started just doing our own stuff, small films, $500,000 budgets, $750,000 budgets. But we were working with our friends again, but now we were doing features and I would direct them and they were all like $1 million or under. Back when you were shooting film. And so, one camera was expensive, that aspect of it. And it was in 1999, because we had done so many kids things, Disney approached us about doing this pilot called Spivey's Kid Brother, which turned out to be Even Stevens. And I remember we all interviewed Shia LaBeouf, over at the Disney Channel building. And Shia was amazing. He made us laugh. He made us roll on the ground. He wasn't exactly great at memorizing lines, but he could make us laugh. And we were doing a comedy. So I was going, we can teach him how to do the lines, but we cannot not have this kid in our show. So we did the pilot in 99 and it got picked up. And by 2000, we started, and they gave us like 22 episodes the first
Wow.
season. I know it's wow. And we didn't have a big budget. That was where that skill from starting films when you were 12, like point it this way and we're here, point it this way and we're here, point it this way and we're here. We did all those tricks I had learned along the way, but we had terrific writers. And again, it just showed when you have great writers and an amazing talent like Christy Romano and Shia LaBeouf and Donna Pascal play the mom, like we had just something special. And we had to make, since we didn't have any money really, we had to make things up. But it was our first like real big union, show. And it started to be successful. People liked it. They liked laughing. It was single camera film style. We didn't have a laugh track, but we, just the funny was made apparent. That's how we started. And because that was successful, they gave us That's a Raven. And at one point, we were like doing the last season of Even Stevens, the first season of That's a Raven. And I had never done, by that point, a four-camera sitcom.
Mm.
And it was such a learning experience. And again, I just worked with the crew, so I learned how to direct it. But boy, was that fun, because every Monday you had a table read and, you'd kind of go home. Tuesday, you'd rehearse and then you'd show it to the producers. Wednesday, you'd rehearse and you'd show it to the network. And you're getting home by, the first one by noon, by the second day by 3, Wednesday by 5. And then Thursday, you start shooting the hard scenes that don't require an audience, that had some stunts or special effects. And then Friday, we shot it in front of a live audience of kids. And it was like a play a week. And then Monday, we'd start all over again. And it was another great education of, again, working with Raven Simone, incredible actress who could carry,
Mm.
the show. But I'm just constantly learning. I'm a student of film. I'm a student of television, whatever. And it keeps changing. And you have to be so on it, because if you're not, you'll get left behind. And that's why I have 3 boys now, and they're making like YouTube videos and Insta videos. And to watch their creativity, and I'm blown away. It was like when the 80s came and music videos were cool, because you could do
Yeah.
anything and you were right. Nothing was wrong. And it's the same thing now with Instagram and Snapchat and all these things where they're just, or TikTok, they're just making incredibly cool videos.
Wow.
Yeah, that which kind of I've wondered, like with when you were doing the when you were doing that when you're doing Even Stevens, that was primarily shot on location, right? Like that there was that type of, because you mentioned how you didn't have any laugh tracks and you're doing more sitcom stuff. Like there was that transition, like when Sweet Life of Zach and Cody started coming out, and some of these other films, like, or Hannah Montana, that you can tell they were in studio. But with
Yeah.
Even Stevens and even Lizzie McGuire, you can tell that they were in the space, and that just made it more relatable. That made a little bit more charming. What are your thoughts on that? Because you were there seeing the on
Well,
set.
it was the progression of Disney Channel. And by that time I hadn't started in sitcoms, which I was usually on a sound stage and all the sets are lined up next to each other and they just roll the cameras from set to set. But Even Stevens, we took over where they had based Baywatch in Playa del Rey, and it was an old like saw factory, and we built our sets there. And so 3 days we'd be on the set, which was their house, the school, and we'd build a swing set per episode. Then 2 days of that episode, we'd go out on location. Then the next week we'd start out on location for 2 or 3 days, and we'd come back to the stages. So we were ping ponging all around, and that's where I live in the Playa del Rey area. We would ping pong around, but all those sets were built, and even the front of the saw factory, if you will, we made the front of their school. So we would drive in a yellow
Okay.
car here and here, and that was like the exterior school, so they could have scenes
Oh,
walking around the school. And there was a sidewalk, but it was done on stage. But it had that film style, like from the 60s of like I Dreamed of Jeannie, or although that had a laugh track, Get Smart, Gilligan's Island. They had, just great writing, but it was shot on film. It was stylistically different than a sitcom, which is in front of a live audience, and there's,
Right.
line, joke. So there was all these things we learned along the way. And look, if we move people emotionally, if we, again, brighten their day by that half hour of entertainment, that was our goal. Just make people enjoy themselves by any ways. And we were doing things at that time because they hadn't really done really sophisticated shows for kids. But what happened is there were all these really good writers that were on big sitcoms, big hit sitcoms, and those guys would come and write for us. Again, coming right back to the script. So you'd get really funny stuff that was almost adult humor to a certain degree, but could still work on the kid level. And all they were interested, they used to say this to me, is that it had to work for the kid. It didn't matter if the adults got it or not. So they would go for things that were working on two levels. It hit the kids on one level, but the parents would be watching it and go, what are they really talking about? It was fun
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
to write at that time.
Yeah. I have a
Yeah.
question, Sean. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Even Stevens and especially the movie. How was it working with Hilary Duff from Raise Your Voice? Because I know you directed that film as well, right?
Yes. Well, I had actually given Hillary her first real movie called Casper Meets Wendy.
Oh, is that
It
right?
was,
Okay.
yeah, like in
Wow.
1998, I think, because I'd done Casper: A Spirited Beginning. That was the first Casper after Casper the movie, and then
Okay.
Casper Meets Wendy, and she played Little Wendy. And it was really interesting when she auditioned. This is something, again, I learned.
Mm.
She wasn't necessarily the best actress at that time, but man, you'd look at her just off camera and she looked fine. You pan the camera onto her and she lit up the screen. It was like
Wow.
glitter. And I couldn't explain it. I'm like looking at her, going, the camera loves her. For some reason, she is so adorable on camera. And again, even though I'm the director and maybe a producer at that point, it still has to run through a lot of people have to agree to it because they go, we're spending millions of dollars on this one
Yeah.
cast member. But that was her first, leading role in a movie, and she carried it beautifully. And I still have Wendy's wand. She gave it to me at the end of the
Oh,
production
she
as well.
did. Wow.
Yeah. Any rate, so it was she was just extraordinary. And
Yeah.
then we were doing Even Stevens while they were doing Lizzie McGuire. So I would have loved to have directed a Lizzie McGuire, but I was doing another show where I was producing all of them and directing.
Yeah.
Again, my secret, I would read all the scripts and I'd go, I want to do that one because I could tell just from the script which ones were going to pop a little bit more. And so when we were coming to an end of that around 2002, 2003, I said, do you want to do another movie? And New Line was coming to us, and I said, I think I can get Hilary Duff to do Raise Your Voice.
Hmm.
And if you look at the movies that I do, they generally have something to do with things I love to do. It was music, and I grew up in a rock and roll band, and I
Oh, cool.
still I play guitars, piano, and or and so I just wanted to do something music. So we did that
Yeah.
with Hillary. That's why I love to surf. So that's why I ended up doing Beyond the Break
Yeah.
and Soul Surfer. So or I love to sail, and that's how we got True Spirit. So there's all these things that, and the reason I do it, I wish I could say it's super creative because I go, I'll do it more if I'm around it.
Mm.
If I'm out by a beach where everybody's got a surfboard, at lunch we'll all go surfing. So it would be fun to do, and that's kind of how I would try to pick things that were of interest of mine.
Interesting. Well, going back to Even Stevens real quick, after the show, where did the idea come about to do the movie? Because I know you directed the Even Stevens movie.
So at that point at the Disney Channel, I think they would do, and back then we would only do 65 episodes.
Oh,
So
okay.
at the end, they were thinking, yeah, we should do a movie for the Disney Channel. And
Okay.
it was interesting because at the time, they were very different departments at the company. There was like the movie side and the TV side, and we were on the TV side. And they were deciding to do a movie. And I remember we had all the sets were up, and we were shooting until, say, I just want to say June 1st.
Okay.
And the movie was going to go August 15th. And I was like, well, we should just leave the sets up. And they go, we don't know if the movie's getting picked up. So we had to
Oh,
tear all the sets down.
wow.
And a month and a half later, we had to build them all back up again.
Oh,
I was
man.
going, it would only cost me like 10 grand to rent the warehouse and just leave
Yeah.
it there. But it was just beyond me why they would make decisions like that, but they did. And so in that the thing that was interesting about that movie because it wasn't a huge budget, if you saw the ocean, obviously we were in Hawaii, but
Mm.
there were some scenes that we shot over at a garden in Los Angeles. So some of the actors, they'd be talking to each other, and we look this way and we're in Los Angeles, we look this way and we're on the beach in Hawaii, because we
Oh,
could only
wow.
bring like the family with us on
Yeah.
that trip. And at that point, I grew up in Burbank in Los Angeles, and I would go to Hawaii here and there, and it was always a place of vacation, no work, no anything. I didn't want to mix the two, but the opportunity on that came to shoot a movie in Hawaii, and I was really nervous about it because I wanted back then to have peace in Hawaii and then hard work in LA. But
Mm.
we married the two together, and then we'd have production meetings out on the lanai. It was just so fun. and we shot, half the movie in actual Hawaii. So it was the greatest thing in the
Wow.
world.
Oh, I bet.
We had a plane land on the water, and the cast got
Mhm.
out, and it was fun. But the whole thing when they're on the cliff and the helicopter comes, that's Malibu.
Wow, is
That
that
Oh
right?
well,
That's
yeah.
Malibu.
yeah.
Oh, wow.
So we split it up. If it was blue ocean,
Yeah,
it was crazy, but we had so much fun on that movie.
very cool.
Yeah, I love the teen coming of age genre. In fact, I wrote some scripts that were produced that are more coming of age. So your genre of filmmaking and TV creation, I grew up with, and I think there's also some reflection in how I want to have my work. So thank you for being an early inspiration of me, because I'm also a filmmaker. I went to Biola University and
Fantastic.
I went to their film school. It's called the Snyder School of Cinema now because the Snyder family of In and Out has now contributed a large sum to building our film school. So,
Excellent.
so I'm in the process of writing, and when I saw Reagan, it was inspiring, and I loved like the debate that you did with Dennis Quaid, and then with the historical Mondale debate. It was what I liked about that debate is that it was reminiscent to what Robert Zemeckis did with Forrest Gump, when you
Exactly.
had Tom Hanks in the historical archive around him. So
Right.
when they showed that with Dennis Quaid as Reagan and the Mondale debate, I was like, oh, this just has the Forrest Gump, Robert Zemeckis creative edge to it. So can you expound more just on your work with the Reagan film?
Sure. And I do. I am always trying to be on the cutting edge of whatever technology was. And I think we might have had a different actor across from him, and then we only took the face of Mondale and put it on that actor. So there were other tricks we used, whereas I know Zemeckis used the frame of the old footage and put Tom Hanks into it. So, however we did it, I mean, we de-aged Dennis, like because we start with him in Hollywood. We had another actor, David Henry, who's a Disney Channel star, as a matter of fact, is the younger Reagan, and we had another even kid playing the boy Reagan, Dutch Reagan. But I embrace technology. I figure out how to use it and how to work it. And what it does is when they do things, Casper's a great example. When they do it for the first time, figured out how to make ghosts that you could see through. I think the program was Soft Image. All the R&D of developing that program is what made it expensive. But by the time they got to my movie, they had it figured out already. So we weren't breaking any new technical ground. We were using what they invented. So by the time I got to Reagan, I was like, I want to, and I grew up, watching Reagan in the 80s. I was a part of that. So I kind of knew what it was like. And I wanted to simulate those scenes that were there. So I would go back and watch footage on YouTube, watch his speeches, and then we would go over it together with Dennis and figure out how to get. And sometimes the speeches were only this big in the script, but Dennis wanted to learn the whole speech. And so we'd have a teleprompter there. And so all of a sudden we'd find interesting lines that came up and we would cut them together and made it more interesting. But from a technical point of view, Reagan is a talkie, really. It's a straightforward movie, but it's just slice of life. It's an interesting thing because there isn't one big story. It's all the bits. Like the thing that interests, first of all, the thing that interests me was it was told from the point of view of a Russian. That I was like, wait, what? That's interesting to me to bookend and have it
Right.
go through John Voight
Mhm.
playing a Russian spy. So that just to me made it a different way into Reagan, which I thought was cool. And that was in the script. I wish that was my idea, but they had done it. I read it and thought that was fantastic. Um, but then to do scenes when he's a little kid with his mother to see that he, went to church and he was good at memorizing lines and that there was a bully in his life. And his mom said, you got to stand up to bullies. And it's interesting how these things you learn as a children will take you through your life. But most people didn't know this, what he did as a kid, that he went to college. They knew he was an actor, a B movie actor along the way. And then he became governor and then he retired. Like he was like 60 something and he just retired. He was done. And
Wow.
then he didn't like the way of the world. And then he ran again. And like in the movie, he lost to Ford. I retired again. So you sit there and I go, it's really good for older people, like that you aren't over until you want it to be over. Like if you want to keep going and find stuff, he kept going for it. And then at that time, it's funny, he became the oldest president at like 68 or 69 years old. And now I go, we're a whole decade further with our presidents of how old people are. But back then, that was like, is he too old to be president? At 60 something years old. So it was just to me, it was wild to like find these interesting story bits. And especially when I could tell him with humor, because I remember he reminded me of my parents and they were funny and he was funny. So I tried to instill some of the humor and then also some of the heartache. Like I didn't know he lost a child. I mean, that'll change a person if you're like, you're thinking that your life is going a certain way and then it doesn't. And that ended up making him get divorced from Jane Weinman and finding Nancy. And I don't think if he had not met Nancy, I do not think he would have been president of the United States. That power couple, if you will, drove him in a certain way. Because to become president, I think there's other factors involved. It's not enough for one person to want it. You have to have a group of people to want it. And I think his talent as an actor helped him. He knew how to speak to people. He had his own ideas from when he was a little kid, but he definitely knew how to work with people. He like when he was on the General Electric TV show, they flew him all over the countries to talk to their factories. So if you think about it, he got very comfortable in front of groups of people because it's different on a set. As you know, you're like a little team of people and it's just you and the camera
Yeah.
and the actor and you shoot little bits. But to actually perform in front of a lot of people and get them to laugh and get them to move emotionally, he learned that along the way. So then by the time he ran for president, he had those skills that allowed him to run the country and get the people of America behind him. And oddly, I don't know if you remember, half the country hated him. You know, I didn't follow politics at all back then, but when I made the movie, I was going, oh, I had no idea he was so hated by half of the country at a certain point. So it's
Yeah,
weird.
Wow. Yeah.
which brings me to like my next point. Like this was being filmed during a very contentious time in our history, in our country's history.
Mhm.
What you were already a successful filmmaker in just your impressive resume. Did you experience some pushback since the temperature has been turned up a bit in modern years for you wanting to make this film about Ronald Reagan?
Well, I'm like still in my head an indie filmmaker. Most of the films I do, I go out and I raise the money and I find a subject matter that I think people will like and I find the money. And there's generally like people were throwing money at us that loved Reagan, which is different than like
Sure.
the Soul on Fire movie I just did. People who know John O'Leary from St. Louis, Missouri, threw money at us to make that movie. So all of my movies have been a challenge. Even when I made Soul Surfer, like everybody was like going, why isn't this a TV movie of the week? And I had to go, well, why isn't it a movie of the week? Well, I'm going to put movie stars. I'm going to put Helen Hunt and I'm going to put Dennis Quaid and Anna Sophia Robb. Like, you have to start asking yourself questions when people would, the best answer is yes, we're going to make your film. The second best answer is no, quickly, so you can move on and look for somebody else or some other funding source. But when you raise money, that is what you do. So I was never like what Hollywood was doing or what they thought of my work, never did. And the critics don't always like what I do. I always lived in the 50-50 range.
Sure.
50% of the people liked what I did and 50% of the people hated what I did. So I said, well, I'm only making it for me. And if half the people like it, that's good enough. It wasn't until Reagan that the people, I think, who liked Reagan, who were conservative, loved it. Like in Rotten Tomatoes, 98% loved it. And the critics were down at like 20%. And it was interesting to just see because to me, they're projects. You go on and then you say next, you go to the next one. And you start to learn when you do it, what made this more likable? What made this
Mhm.
less likable? And you have no real control over it. You don't know what's happening in the world. You try to get it right, um, but as far as pushback, I still make movies, after Reagan, which was interesting. I thought you were going to say because we shot it during COVID. That was weird. That was my first experience, wearing masks and having to be 6 feet away. So it made it complex to make a movie.
Sure.
And it was
Yeah.
a very strange time because, you're trying to make a movie and they've got like a COVID commissioner on your set. And if you pull your mask
Compliant
down and
officer.
bite of a
Yep.
banana, like people are jumping on you, and you're like, whoa, 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 just having a bite to eat. So it was a very challenging time.
Wasn't
Uh,
it? Oh, what a
Oh
it, it
man.
was
nightmare.
it was very challenging, and I didn't like that at all. And I'm so glad that it's over. To make a film that's hard enough, as you know,
Yeah.
with now you got to be 6 feet away from each other, and you got to wear a mask. What did you say? I said pan right. It's that sort of stuff. And so it made it more challenging, but we got through it. It was necessary during that time, and we move on next.
Yeah.
Right. And the which brings me to like I want to get your thoughts on where you think our industry is headed with the advent of AI. And I know there's a bunch of scare tactics out there, but I'm quite optimistic. And there are a lot of people who are even surprised that even musical theater and Broadway are still around. But yet, I think there's people who are going to keep that alive. And I think it's good to innovate, to not resist it and put our head in the sand. So I want your thoughts on that.
Mm.
Josiah, you're absolutely right. We have to embrace it, and I think it's going to be wonderful. I always go back to there was a time, we were on horses, and these cars they're going to get in our way. It's like, no, you have to work. Horses are still here, and cars are still here. Or we're on trains. I don't want to go down those planes; they'll fall out of the sky. And now we travel everywhere in airplanes. I think AI is just, and by the way, it's not new. It's been an evolution in film. Like if you look at the CG, how we were able to make backgrounds, the technology of how you make a film has been the kind of the same as 100 years. They did montages. They were, to me, go back and look at films from the teens and the 1920s. When the first time they did a close up, everybody in this audience screamed because they thought the guy's head was cut off. They didn't
Yep.
understand. They shoot him like wide, like a
Film
play.
history, man.
And then they figured out how to do this stuff. So each time, I think about going from non-sound to sound, boom, all those actors lost their jobs. Now a new way. Think of it when they went from black and white to color. Boom, all of that did it. Then in the 60s, the indie filmmakers, the cameras became small enough that people went out on the road and really lower budget ideas could get shot. And then I remember the next big jump. I would say it was Star Wars when the technology of visual effects really came on and everybody was using it. It was used before in like 2001: A Space Odyssey with Kubrick,
Mm.
and there was films, but they like mastered it, so it became mass. The next jump for me was in '92 when they made Jurassic Park, and it went full digital. And it
Mm.
was like I knew right then it's gonna change, like what you can do in the computer married with the live action stuff. So I think we're right there again now. AI, and I've been studying it intensely because I want to use it in my work. And just when you prompt things in, it makes the whole frame. So on a film I'm doing right now, I'm trying to go, how do I have live action stuff with AI? How do they match up? I know you can do AI and do the whole frame, and they're learning how to make, the angles of all the people work at every different angle. But it is a tool to the filmmaker, and we got to use it as a tool. I think the writer I always said this, like if you were a songwriter, you could write a song and play it and people could go, look, there's a songwriter, they're really good. Or you could be a writer and write a book and, oh, look at their voice, and here it is. Or a painter could paint a painting. But a filmmaker always needed 100 people to help you do it at a high level. Now I think filmmakers, I mean, I'm already seeing all over Instagram, people write little 1 minute or 30 seconds or 10-second little movies that are all AI, and you're like laughing or you get emotional by it. And I go, they've nailed it. Now, eventually they're going to figure out how to do a whole movie like this. And the way that we like Snoopy or we like, Mickey Mouse, there's going to be a new character that's a cross between Charlton Heston and George Clooney and Kevin Costner. It'll be a new actor. We don't know him, but he'll be suave and good looking, and he'll be doing stuff that we all love. He'll be ageless, that whoever owns the character will be able to use him. And it will change how we do it. And I say we have to learn how to embrace it. And film will not go away. Like you said, theater, it's still here. I love going to Broadway. There's theater all over America. How we do it, some will say, oh, that's an AI film. Oh, that's a film with humans. That's how it's going to be. It's just going to change a little bit. But I think the voice of the filmmaker, the director, the writer they're going to be able to get exactly what they want. Because before you write it, and with production budgets and all of that stuff, you could only get so far of what your imagination could take you. Now they'll be able to sit alone with no money at all and write some incredible backdrop set or a world that we'd never thought of and never heard of before. I mean,
Wow.
I just love going to the movies. I remember when I would see the Star Trek movies and you'd be in a new world and you're like, wow, somebody thought of that. Somebody had to think of it and then figure out how to make it. So now I think it's open to more people. It's a more democratic way of getting artists that want to be filmmakers to get their vision across in a whole new way. And as long as people watch it, I love that nowadays, with an iPhone and your computer, you can make a movie, and if it's good, people will watch it and they'll watch it on YouTube, and it's like, but when I grew up, you couldn't do that. It was expensive to make a movie, and you had to get a distributor for people to see it. Now you can shoot something on Saturday and put it out on Sunday and get a reaction. Is this idea working?
No.
And that I think makes creativity in filmmaking is about to go through the roof.
Right. And that's encouraging, I think, for this upcoming generation. Like my brother and I, we're working on our third film right now under our moniker called Sand Art Media. And we're at this place where independent filmmaking is the place to start heading into, right? Because we're no longer at the behest of the studios anymore. And I think your career is a testament to that, sir. So for it's just like, what the hell? Just make a movie. And you see
Right.
you see people like that, like innovators like Robert Rodriguez when he did that with Mariachi and he did that with Sin City. He was there, he was the only voice in Austin, and now people are coming to Austin wanting to like innovate. He's like, I was here the whole time. You know what I mean? So it's like,
Right.
so the fact that we're on our third film right now, we just got funding for it, and it's like let's just make sand art into something big. And that's where I'm starting to get inspiration from Rodriguez and then from your work, sir, and wanting to just really build this and use AI as that tool, not as an enemy. I mean, it's rather remarkable to see Terminator 2 coming to fruition in the sense of it being able to learn, and it's a computation computer, much like how Schwarzenegger described it in T2, kind of like how you were saying about the innovation. It was actually Spielberg who saw James Cameron's use of the technology for the T-1000 that made him apply that technology to the T-Rex in Jurassic Park.
And
So,
that's important to know. We know what metal looks like because we see the inside of cars. We don't exactly know what a dinosaur looked like. We know lizards, we know like iguanas, we roughed it out. But back in 92, when they tried to do humans, we could tell it was off. Come to where we are now. I see humans in AI and I'm like, that's 100% photoreal. We are there, and the artists who really do it, I totally get it. They have nailed it. And you're absolutely right. I mean, technology has been going so you don't have to live in LA or New York. You can now be anywhere because everybody likes to make films. All you need is an area and people, community coming together to do it. So it's the best time in the world. And I know Texas is like a big hotspot. I've made like 3 films in Texas and love shooting there, but especially Austin, Texas is a great place to be making movies.
Sean, before we close on the episode, I do want to ask you, for those that are in this going to college to be a film student and use that as a career, what advice can you give for those that, because I know there's those that kind of will try to do something, but then they'll probably be like, like I messed up, I failed at this. And, I know it's kind of hard at times for students when they start something, they kind of get discouraged because they messed up on something. But what advice can you give for those to keep going, even if you do fail?
Well, first of all, I go, everybody's path is different. Clearly, there's lots of people in the movie industry that didn't go to film school, and they're great. They
Yeah.
come through a different way. We all have our different filters, how we grew up, where we've been, the people we're with. So you're like a songwriter. Your experiences that you tell or the scripts that you get attracted to and then go tell, that's the sort of life as a filmmaker. But if it's somebody who goes to film school, I say go. There's a community of other filmmakers like you that want to make films and learn the craft and look at the old films and look at the new films together and try to articulate so that you learn a language. There is a film grammar language that everybody should know,
Mm,
and you're always breaking new ground, but you get together with a group of people who are like-minded.
mm,
And I also think for college it's just, I call it the baby step out of the house. You've lived with your parents till you're 18. Now you're kind of away, you're kind of on your own, but you're protected a little bit. But it's education. I look at my boys right now in school. My son's at University of Miami, and I go, I would trade you in a minute to go back to school and not have to worry about bills and life and just let my brain fill up with cool information. Because
yeah.
when we're in school, we would have like famous directors come and talk to us. We would
Wow.
have watch films. We would do Q&As afterwards and discuss it. And that's where you're learning your craft. You're learning all the different things. And then they physically let you do it. You get lenses and you're studying together. And the biggest thing I say, just do it. I wanted to start a podcast called Just Shoot It. And then somebody else already had it. I was like, well, that one went away. But the idea is if you're a writer, just write it. If you're an actor, you just got to go act, whether it's in a student film, a short film, a commercial, a play. If you're a director, a filmmaker, you just got to go make it. And it's easier than anything right now. You can do it with an iPhone. You can do it with your computer, edit together, add music, but you have to do it. You can't talk about it. So I
Mm,
always say start small. Do a film that you can literally do in a day, like spend the morning Saturday, get your friends together, shoot a scene, and then that afternoon start editing it together. And by Sunday night, you'll have something that you made.
mm.
And you should fail. You should make mistakes or go, I'm going to do that better. The more you do it, the more mistakes you get, but you'll start to see less mistakes getting made and more you're doing something that nobody's done before.
Wow.
And go to the movies, go opening weekend so you can see it with a crowd to go, what are they reacting to?
Mm.
I remember for me, it was Titanic. I went to Titanic
Oh,
5 times
yeah.
when it came out because I kept seeing it going up in the box office up, and I'm like, what is it? What is it about this movie? And I remember like people with their nose up in the air, oh, the writing's not very good. And I'm going, are you kidding me? The writing's so good. And yet people are making it the first billion, trillion dollar movie that's out there. And what I saw was a lot of repeat business of young girls coming to see Leo. So I started to notice, like, by going 5 times, oh, this audience is the same, and they're going again. I recognized girls they were there like 2 Saturdays ago. And I started to go, what is it that makes a great movie? And if you make spectacle, something we've never seen before, it's really hard to do these days because we've seen everything. Except now with what Josiah was saying with AI, we're going to be able to make things that nobody's ever seen before because we can afford it. You can think it and type it and adjust it. Our minds are going to get blown with creativity. And I just cannot wait for the future of film because of that.
Well said. Thank you so much, Sean, for sharing that. Thank you.
Yeah, it's encouraging, Sean, that you are optimistic about AI instead of somebody who's roughed it in your career as you have and successfully. You're like, oh, this, I'm not a big fan of it because people can do anything at any point in time. They didn't have to work for it. But I appreciate the humbleness and just the humility and the encouragement. I'm just like, hey, it's better for you. I wish I could be where you are. So have at it, and that's encouraging to hear. There isn't like any animosity or bitterness and, oh, you young kids.
Oh no, you have to embrace it. You have to stay current. Keep watching, keep learning. Even I look at Clint Eastwood directing in his 90s and I'm going, you go. Keep going and learn. Don't never stop learning. There's always something that you have to say and embrace the technology. However, if you look at it, go back to the 1900 films, films are the same. They tell a story that move us emotionally. That's ultimately what you need. We just have to keep up with technology and whatever the stories are. And you'll even find, look, Shakespeare was doing the same stories that are being done today. It's the same things that rock the human species that we want to see people go through, and we get a catharsis by watching them do it.
Wow.
Yeah, it's I don't know if you've ever read that book on editing called In the Blink of an Eye. And it talks about how humanity has been naturally accustomed to filmmaking because when we dream almost like a cut film. So
Hmm.
it's like we already have that in our psyche. We're at one
Absolutely.
place at one moment, and then our dream cuts and we're somewhere else. So it's like the fact that when cinema was presented, it's like we recognized it because humanity already saw that in their dreams.
Mhm.
And
Absolutely. My dreams have credits on them. Opening credits is great.
Yeah.
and and you're right. Like I think there is something deeply ingrained in the human psyche to relate to story. I know you've done work with Affirm Films. I don't know your religious perspective, but we're Christian, and we read the Gospels that Christ portrayed truths in parable form, so that way people could understand it better. And so it's like it's poetic and beautiful to think that God is a storyteller, and the way that he portrayed himself and conveyed himself to mankind was through parables and just simple stories that people can understand, and also just pass to the generation after.
Yeah.
Well, absolutely. And I'm Christian. I'm a Catholic. I went to 16 years of Catholic school. So I'm all there. And to me, that is part of who I am. So if you notice pieces of that, I try not to put it in my films like intensely, but it is there. Like I just did Bow Artists at War. If you guys saw Schindler's List, there's a couple who get married in the Plaszow barracks. We went to Israel and we got the rights to the real couple's story, and we made a whole film about that. It's a
Wow.
Jewish story, and
Wow.
we're all one people, whether what religion you are, what you like, we're all one. We got to figure out how to tell stories and experience that. And I think being a faith-based filmmaker, like people try to label you. And at one time, I was like, "Oh, you did kid shows," and then in a certain one, "Oh, you do coming of age adolescent stories." And now I'm doing Reagan and adult, type stories. And I go, "That's just my evolution. How I didn't plan it that way, but it's just where the jobs were and how I went." So, but I do believe in miracles, and I do
Yeah.
believe that there is good. Like I said, when I walked in out of Raiders of the Lost Ark, and it changed me for the better. It made me happier. It made me love that character. I just think it is amazing. So I just think whatever your religion is or whatever, tell your stories to the world, and eventually we all want to see. I mean, I still go to 2 movies a week in the theaters just to sit with an audience. And
Oh
I get
wow,
so
that's cool.
Beautiful.
and you have to do it
Yeah.
because it's different. Look, I love Amazon, I love Netflix, but I'm alone and I'm just watching the TV, so it's an experience. But when you're there, when the latest Mission Impossible came out and the whole audience
Oh
is jumping
yeah.
back or jumping up and getting scared, it's the coolest community moment that you could ever imagine.
Yeah. That movie was great, by the way. I loved it so
It
much.
was.
Oh my God.
I felt like a kid. I was like, and he's so great because he does the stunts, and I go,
Yeah. It's
normal world, you don't need to do the stunts anymore because how we can do it and keep them safe. But the
right.
fact that we've been talking about it is because he actually at 63 is still doing his own stunts.
That's
So
crazy.
like you kind of go, is he crazy? Like hanging off the bottom of a helicopter,
Yeah.
getting on a
Right.
plane. But you're like, we're talking about it. So it's great promotion that he still loves films and to keep the love of films going out for the next generations.
Wow.
Yeah, so we're nearing the end of our time. Sean, we would love to have you back. I think you just fit what Rhythm and Roads podcast is.
I'd
And
love to
you're
come
just a
back.
great guest. And do you mind if you just tell people what you're working on next, where they can find you? Maybe just a clip for yourself for your website.
Sure. Well, I'm at SeanMcNamara.com, SeanMcNamara.com. Like I said at the beginning of the show, I have two films coming out in 2025. Bow, Artist at War. That's September 26th from Paramount and Showbiz Direct nationwide. And then on October 10th, I have Soul on Fire. And that's coming out from Sony nationwide.
Wow.
And I would definitely check out those films. And right now, I am working on a film with Kelsey Grammer and John Voight that we're going to be shooting
Wow.
in my backyard in Manhattan Beach. And it's fun to shoot in LA. I haven't done it in a while, but just going down the street and checking out the locations, that's really fun. That'll probably be coming out next year. And then I have the big film called Oster that we're going to Prague to shoot. And
Awesome.
it's the story, it's kind of the Alzheimer's story and how what his life was like and his contemporaries of that time, which is an amazing,
Wow.
amazing story. So
Amazing.
that's what I'm doing now.
Awesome.
Wow. Well, Josh, close this out.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Sean McNamara, for coming on Rhythm and Roads and my co-host Josiah Solis. It's been such a pleasure, Sean, to have you and share your incredible story and just the journey from the beginning. And it means so much to us. So thank you for
Thank you,
your
Sean. Thank
time.
you so much, man.
Joshua, Josiah, thank you. God bless you guys. Have a great rest of your day.